All right, buckle up because we're diving headfirst into Advaita Vedanta today, and not just any interpretation, but Swami Dayananda's traditional take on it. So we're looking at his book, The Teaching Tradition of Advaita Vedanta, which is, well, let's just say he doesn't mince words.
Yeah, he's definitely got a very direct style, which I appreciate, actually.
Yeah.
And right off the bat, he tackles this misconception that a lot of people have, that Advaita Vedanta is just another philosophy, like you can kind of pick and choose what you like.
Yeah, like it's a buffet or something. Pick your favorite insights, leave the rest.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He's like, no, hold on a second. This isn't a philosophy in that sense. It's a pramana,
A pramana meaning.
a means of knowledge, a way to directly perceive reality. Not just think about it, but really experience the truth of it directly.
So not about subscribing to a set of beliefs, but more like, I don't know, having a direct encounter and experience.
Exactly. It's like imagine looking through a telescope and finally seeing the craters on the moon for yourself. It's not a belief anymore. It's a direct perception. And that's where things get really interesting because Swami Dayananda argues that the core message of Advaita Vedanta, this idea of oneness,
Which can be a bit of a loaded term, right? Oneness.
absolutely gets thrown around a lot these days. But he says this oneness isn't something you achieve through practice or effort. He says it already exists.
So it's not about like becoming one with something outside of ourselves, but realizing that we already are.
Precisely. It's about recognizing a unity that's always been present, but that we've somehow lost sight of. And to clarify this, he spends a good amount of time addressing what he calls the myths that have cropped up, even within traditional Advaita, like, for example, the misconception surrounding Ananda.
Ananda, often translated as bliss.
Right, and people often chase after ecstatic experiences, thinking that's what Ananda's all about.
Looking for that temporary high, that euphoric feeling.
Yeah, but Swami Dayananda says, nope, that's not quite it. True Ananda, he says, comes from recognizing the inherent limitlessness of the self.
So not about chasing those fleeting moments of happiness, but something deeper, something more fundamental within ourselves.
Yes, he's saying true Ananda, true bliss, comes from recognizing our inherent wholeness, our connection to something much vaster than our limited sense of self.
So it's not about chasing temporary highs, it's about recognizing a kind of inherent wholeness.
Yes, it's like we mistake the symptoms for the cure. We chase after these fleeting experiences thinking that's where we'll find lasting fulfillment. But
But it's never enough.
exactly, it's like trying to fill a bottomless pit with pebbles.
And that actually brings us to another myth that Swami Dayananda tackles head on, this idea that intellectual knowledge is somehow less important than, say, mystical experience or realization.
So instead of seeing knowledge as a pathway to truth, it's almost like some people see it as a lesser pursuit.
Yeah, like you can just bypass all the hard work of study and reflection and jump straight into some enlightened state. But Swami Dayananda is very clear that true self-knowledge, that is realization.
There's no separation between the two. Right. Think of it this way. You already possess the innate capacity to see, right? You don't need to acquire sight. You simply need to remove whatever obstacles are clouding your vision.
Which might be why he places so much emphasis on really understanding the teachings, not just having a feeling, but actually grasping the concept.
Exactly. And he uses this really fascinating analogy. It's called Stillerundati Nyaya. Have you heard of this one?
Rings a bell, but refresh my memory.
Okay, so picture this. It's a traditional Hindu wedding ceremony, and the young couple is asked to locate this very faint star in the night sky called Arundhati, but it's practically invisible to the naked eye.
Sounds tricky. How are they supposed to find it?
Well, they're first directed to find a much brighter star, Vasista, which acts as a kind of guidepost. And once they've located Vasista, they can use it as a reference point to then find the much fainter Arundhati.
So it's about using what's already visible, what's already known, to help you uncover something that's subtler, hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And Swami Dayananda's point is that we can apply this same principle to our search for self-knowledge. We can use our intellect, our existing understanding, as that starting point, that brighter star, if you will, and it can gradually lead us to these deeper truths.
Which brings us to another area where Swami Dayananda kind of shakes things up, this whole idea of the paths to liberation, or moksha.
Right. And this is where he diverges from what a lot of people think. He doesn't really buy into this idea that there are four distinct yogas: jnana, karma, bhakti, hatha, all leading to the same destination.
He kind of streamlines it, right?
Yeah,
He says there are really only two committed lifestyles, as he calls them, jnana yoga and karma yoga.
exactly. And both of these paths, he says, prioritize knowledge as being absolutely paramount. So with jnana yoga, You're dedicating your life to the direct pursuit of self-knowledge, like a renunciate or a scholar might.
And then karma yoga, that's more the path of action, but still with that same emphasis on knowledge.
Exactly. It's about pursuing that knowledge while fulfilling your duties in the world. And he even makes the point that bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, can actually be seen as a form of karma yoga.
Because the rituals, the chanting, all of those practices, they're all about purifying the mind, creating fertile ground for that self-knowledge to blossom.
Exactly. It's not so much about the specific actions themselves, but the underlying intention, the pursuit of knowledge that fuels them. It's all connected in a way.
It's amazing how he brings it all together. Now, what about this idea of achieving a thoughtless state for enlightenment? Swami Dayananda, I know, has some strong opinions on that as well.
Oh, he definitely does. He really pushes back against this notion that we need to somehow eliminate all thoughts to realize our true nature. He's like, look, the self in its purest form, it is inherently thought-free, nirvikalpa, as he calls it, even while thoughts are still present.
So it's not that enlightened beings never have thoughts, it's more about their relationship to those thoughts, wouldn't you say?
Exactly. It's not about becoming some kind of thought zombie. In fact, he points out that even in deep sleep, when thoughts are absent, there's no real knowledge there, no understanding. It's only when we're aware, when we're conscious, that we can actually grasp the truth of our being.
Which makes sense, right? Because if we're trying to see through this illusion of separation that he talks about, that requires a certain level of awareness.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that even our thoughts, they're just objects within the field of awareness. We're not our thoughts. We're the awareness in which those thoughts arise and disappear.
So liberation isn't about eradicating a part of ourselves, but really more about shifting our perspective.
You got it. And this actually leads us to what might be Swami Dayananda's most radical departure from some common interpretations of Advaita Vedanta.
Yeah.
This whole idea of Vaisana exhaustion.
Ah, yes, the vasanas.
Yeah.
These are like the past impressions, the tendencies that cling to the self.
Right, and a lot of spiritual seekers get really caught up in trying to eradicate these vasanas, thinking that liberation is only possible once they've, completely wiped the slate clean.
But Swami Dayananda says, not so fast.
He's like, hold on a minute, you're missing something here. He challenges the whole premise of this idea.
By pointing out that even the sense of individuality that we have, the jivatva, that we often associate with these vasanas,
Is itself a superimposition on the true self.
it's not who we really are.
Exactly. It's like mistaking the wave for the ocean. The wave might have all these unique characteristics, its size, its shape, but ultimately it's still just water. It can't exist separate from the ocean itself.
And it's the same with us. Our sense of being this separate, individual self with all of its baggage and its history is just a temporary expression of something much vaster.
Exactly. And that deeper reality, that's what Swami Dayananda is urging us to connect with. Not by getting rid of a part of ourselves, but by recognizing that the part we're trying to get rid of was never really who we were in the first place.
Now it's a powerful thought to sit with. It's almost like we've been carrying around this heavy suitcase, convinced it's full of these really important things, but it turns out it's just weighing us down.
That's such a great analogy, and that's exactly what Swami Dayananda is pointing to. He's saying, let go of the burden. You don't need to carry that weight around.
It's funny, though, because when you really start talking about this idea that we're already inherently free and whole, as he says, some people might be thinking, well, then what's the point of spiritual seeking in the first place? If we've already got it, why bother with all this, right?
It's a good question, and he actually addresses this directly. He says, the very act of seeking often comes from this mistaken belief that we're lacking something, that we need to become something other than what we are to experience true fulfillment.
We're always looking for something outside of ourselves when really what we're seeking has been within us all along.
Exactly. And remember that analogy of the crystal we talked about earlier. How the crystal itself, its inherent clarity, is always there, even when we place colored objects near it, and it seems to take on those different hues.
Right, so it's not the crystal that changes, it's just our perception of it.
Exactly. And Swami Dayananda is saying that our spiritual journey, it's not about fundamentally changing who we are at our core. It's about removing the clutter, the mental and emotional clutter that prevents us from seeing our true nature.
So more about uncovering than attaining, more about recognizing than achieving.
Precisely. And this is where his emphasis on knowledge is so important. Because he's not advocating for blind faith or just passive acceptance.
It's about actively engaging with the teachings, really questioning, understanding, and then I guess embodying that understanding.
Yes. It's one thing to have an intellectual understanding of these concepts, but it's another thing entirely to really live them, to have them become part of your lived experience.
And that's where the role of a teacher, a guru, can be so helpful, to have someone who's already walked the path to help guide you.
Absolutely. A true teacher can point you in the right direction, but they can't walk the path for you. You have to be willing to do your own inner work, to dismantle those illusions that are keeping you separate from your own true nature.
And speaking of action, I think it's worth circling back to Swami Dayananda's perspective on karma yoga, the path of action.
Yeah, because it's easy to think of karma yoga as just go do good deeds, but he offers a much more nuanced perspective.
He does. He's
Right.
very clear that karma yoga is not about the actions themselves, but about the attitude and the understanding that informs those actions.
So it's not about becoming a selfless do-gooder, trying to rack up spiritual brownie points. Not at all. He gives this example of building a house. He says that same action building a house can be driven by ego, by this desire for recognition, status, material possessions. Or it can be an act of offering, a way of participating in the creative unfolding of the universe.
It's about aligning your actions with that deeper understanding of our interconnectedness, right? Recognizing that even the fruits of our labor, the results, they don't ultimately belong to us.
Exactly. He talks about receiving the results of our actions, whatever those results might be, with this attitude of prasada,
Prasada meaning.
grace, a sacred offering. It's a profound shift in perspective. Instead of constantly striving and being attached to specific outcomes, it's about approaching life with this sense of surrender, of acceptance, knowing that we're part of something much greater than ourselves.
Wow, this has been such a rich exploration of Swami Dayananda's approach to Advaita Vedanta. It's really got me thinking, if there's one key takeaway that our listeners could walk away with today, what would you say it is?
I would say this. You already have everything you need to experience true freedom and fulfillment. It's not about seeking something outside of yourself, but about removing the inner obstacles that are preventing you from recognizing the truth of who you are.
It's an invitation to stop searching and start seeing, to let go of the illusion of separation and rest in that peace, that wholeness that's always been present.
Beautifully said.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. It's been such a pleasure unpacking these teachings with you.
It's been a pleasure being here.